Hi, I'm Shannon, and I'm going to show you how to make this super cute Santa Sleigh and reindeer for Christmas that has wheels and fits two people, so you can push your kids around the neighborhood, or you can just use it as a decor piece and put presents in it. Plus, once Christmas is over, you can take it apart and make it easier to store during the rest of the year. First, I'm going to start with how to build the sleigh. Here's the material sheet of everything you'll need to make this sleigh. I got 2 sheets of plywood and 3 2x4s and cut all of my pieces to size, and I have build plans with a cut list that show you all of these cuts, and I'll link that down below. So following that cut list, I made all of my table saw cuts and I made all my miter saw cuts, and this is what the sleigh looks like, and this is the structure underneath the sleigh, which is all made out of 2x4s. To make the Santa Sleigh shape, I made it on my iPad and then blew it up to make a stencil out of it. So on the build plans, you just print it out, all of the papers, and they will go together like this, and you just tape it down as you go. One of my sheets of plywood I had cut in half at Home Depot, and I stacked them on top of each other so I can cut both sides of the Santa Sleigh at the same time to save time. Plus, since you're cutting them at the same time, both sides will be exactly the same, and you don't have to print out 2 separate stencils. You can see here, I used particle board actually, but I would not recommend particle board. I ended up breaking a piece off because it's not as strong as plywood. This piece wouldn't have snapped off if I used plywood, so learn from my mistakes and use plywood instead. Start with the bottom right corner by lining up the straight bottom of the sleigh with the straight edge of the plywood. Tape it down once you get it in the right place, and so you just put all the pieces together like a puzzle, and you work from left to right and down to up. And for reference, this is what it looks like when it's put together. The pages along the left side should be flush with the side of the plywood, so you can really just line it up with the side and then move it up and down until the stencil lines up. You can also use clear packing tape across the stencil, because you're going to need to see the lines as you cut it out. For all the bottom pages, make sure that the stencil line, the bottom line, matches up with the straight line of your plywood. So you can use the straight line of your plywood as the bottom straight line, so this is just one less cut you have to make. And you follow along with all the other pages, and you just work from left to right and bottom up. And you can use a square like this to help you keep the pages going straight up and down and lined up, because all of the columns of the paper should be lined up exactly together. So if the edges are aligned with the paper below it, all you need to do is move the paper up and down until the stencil matches up. And if you're wondering why there isn't a piece of paper in the center of the sleigh, that's because it was blank anyway, so it wasn't necessary. And this is what the stencil looks like when it's all taped down. But before we start cutting out our sleigh outlines, we need to attach the 2 plywood pieces together so we can cut them out at the same time, so both sides are the exact same, plus it will save time. You only have to do it once, and you only need to print 1 stencil out instead of 2. So you can see both my pieces are stacked, and make sure that the sides are flush with each other, especially the bottom. So use 1 1/4 inch flathead screws to attach the 2 to each other. Make sure that they're flathead, because I didn't use flathead screws, and you'll see why that doesn't work later. But yeah, put in around like 6 to 10 screws, and make sure you're not putting it inside of the sleigh outline, or else you'll have like a hole in your finished product once you're done building it. So I'm using a jigsaw, and I used a blade that is specifically made for curved cuts, or else it's going to be a lot harder. So just start slowly cutting, and especially around the curved corners, go really, really slow. And if you notice that your jigsaw starts to go off the line, just back your jigsaw up a little bit and try again. And I tried sticking to the outside of the line the entire time. And remember, your jigsaw blade goes all the way through the wood and past the wood. So if you're exactly on a tabletop, it's going to cut through your table. So you have to make sure that directly under your blade, there's nothing there. That's why I'm using my toolboxes and this like workbench to hold my wood up, so I could use the gap between the 2 as my area to cut. So just keep that in mind and keep adjusting as you go, or else you will have a huge gouge in your table. And you can see as you start cutting out the stencil starts to come up, so you're probably going to need more tape to hold it down. And for these areas here between the like sleigh legs, to cut that out, you're going to have to use a fat drill bit, and just the drill bit just needs to be wider than your jigsaw blade, and you're going to screw holes into each section so you can use that as your starting off point for your jigsaw. So you see here, I put the jigsaw blade through the hole that I made with my drill, and then I just start cutting out that section. And remember to go nice and slow, especially for these tight sections, and you might need to go at it at different angles to really get all the pieces out. Remember earlier how I said you need to use flathead screws to attach the two plywood pieces together? And this is exactly why, because your jigsaw will hit the screws if they're not flush with the surface of the plywood and mess you up. So just continue cutting your sleigh outline out and try to keep the screws attached as long as possible. Like, try not to cut those areas out because you want to keep the two plywood pieces together. But eventually you're going to have to cut away the screws, leaving nothing holding the two plywood pieces together. So you're going to have to use clamps to keep them together while you finish cutting out the rest of the sleigh. You can take off your stencil now, and it's going to look like this. So there's going to be some rough edges. So we're going to need to sand all the rough edges just to make it look really perfect. So we're going to sand all of the edges, really make it really smooth. First with 80 grit sandpaper and then with 120 sandpaper. While sanding, make sure that you sand away all the sharp edges, so if you wipe your hand across it, it won't cut your hand. And for the super tight corners, you're going to have to do that by hand. While you're sanding, you also want to sand all of your other plywood pieces that are also going to be showing as well. And once you finish sanding, you can start with the structure that goes underneath everything. So first lay it out on your sleigh outline so you could see where everything goes. I'm using this piece here as a spacer to know how far away these two pieces are. So through your longest piece into these pieces, you're going to first drill pilot holes, and then using 3-inch long screws, you're going to screw into these pieces here. Then you're going to grab this piece that you used as a spacer and move it to the top, and you're going to do the same thing, drill holes and add your screws in to attach this piece here. Then you're going to make that exact thing once again. So you have two of those exact same pieces, and you're going to connect the two with these longer 2x4s. So you can use pocket hole screws here, or you can get super long screws, like 6-inch long screws, and go through the outside into this piece. But I just used 3-inch screws and screwed them in at an angle like this. And it's easier to do this if you first go straight down a little bit with your drill and then go in at an angle. And you are going to attach 4 of these total, 2 on top like here, and then 2 more on bottom. And I'd recommend installing the screws from the bottom, not the top, because if you install them from the top, they might get in the way of the plywood that's going to sit on top of this from sitting flat on the 2x4s. And during this process, you can use wood glue if you don't plan on taking it apart, but I wouldn't use wood glue if you are planning on taking it apart during the rest of the year. So this is what your structure underneath is going to look like. So now we can attach the plywood seat to this structure, and I put it on the ground first and then put this on top of it so we can screw from the bottom into the plywood seat. First, I made sure it was lined up perfectly, then I drilled holes and added in my 2-inch screws. So now we can move on to painting everything. It's going to be quicker and easier to paint before assembling. The only reason I assembled this beforehand was because most of this is not going to be seen. With this primer and this roller, I primed everything and let that dry and flipped it over and primed the other side and had to go back in with a paintbrush to get all the really tight corners that the roller couldn't get to. And then repeated that but with red paint. And while doing this, I kind of avoided the bottom sleigh part because I'm going to make that gold later. And every single plywood piece needs to be painted on both sides except for the seat and the floor of the sleigh. And then with the structure underneath, you need to paint the back of it because it will be seen from behind. Next, I started sectioning off the red part so I can spray the bottom part gold. And I used scrap pieces of paper to cover the red part just to protect the red part from gold overspray. So got both of those covered. So now I can start spray painting the gold part. As you're spray painting this gold part, really come in at different angles to make sure you get all those little small areas. So now we're going to add the Santa Sleigh sign, and I did this by creating a stencil and then spray painting it on, but someone else who followed the plans actually decided to make the Santa Sleigh out of 1/4-inch plywood and cut out the Santa Sleigh, and I actually think it looks way better. So this is also an option. But if you want to see how I did it, this is how I did it. I printed out this Santa Sleigh stencil that's also provided in my build plans. So I cut out the Santa's part and the sleigh part, and I found that a combination of an X-Acto knife and scissors work pretty well. And you should have 2 sets of these if you want it to say Santa Sleigh on both sides. And technically, you can write whatever you want. Like if you want to write your kid's name, if you want to write your dog's name, like Lola Sleigh, you can write whatever you want. All you need to do is on your computer, you just write whatever you want and then cut out the center so you can use as a stencil. But just keep in mind that the wider the font, the easier it will be to cut out and to spray paint later. So once you get those cut out, tape it down onto your Santa sleigh. And make sure that you're adding it to the right side. You don't want to put it on the inside of the sleigh because it won't be seen anyway. And if there's any parts that are not sitting flat, like here, just put double-sided tape on the back of it to make sure it really stays down. Also use the double-sided tape to tape down these center pieces right here as well. And then make sure to tape all around as well and cover that area, or else you definitely will get overspray all over your sleigh. And when you start spray painting, spray paint from straight up going straight down, because if you go in at different angles, it might spray underneath the paper. Another way you can also do this is just spray the gold spray paint into like a disposable paper bowl and then use a teeny paintbrush to paint that area instead. And that would also really help for the sleigh part, like the really teeny parts that the spray paint really can't get to. Repeat that whole process with the sleigh part as well. And don't forget to do the other side of the sleigh as well. And after all the paint dries, we can start assembling now. So first we're going to attach the floor piece, and we're going to do that by first drilling holes through the bottom into the floor and then adding the 2-inch screws through that into the plywood piece. And do the same thing for this piece right here. Put the screws through the 2x4s into the plywood and add at least 4 screws going into each piece of plywood. And so this is what you have right now. And you can see I put on the wheels, but I actually would recommend waiting till later because I ended up putting them too close to the edge and having to take them off and put them back on. So next we're going to add this sleigh outline. We're going to lay the whole structure on its side and then put this sleigh thing on top of it so we can screw it into place. So there's 3 different ways you can screw it into place. First, how I did it is I first drilled holes and then added screws kind of at an angle going through the plywood into the sleigh outline. Option 2 of how to do this is you can just drill directly through the outside of the sleigh going into the 2x4s or the plywood. Although your screws will be showing from the outside, but you can go back and put paint over the screws to make the screws blend in more. And third option is using pocket holes and pocket hole screws. You would add the pocket holes to the 2x4s or the plywood on the underside and then add pocket hole screws going into the sleigh outline. After you get that sleigh outline attached on one side, now you can start putting your wheels on. And while you're putting your wheels on, just make sure that they can fully turn around. Like if you put them too close to the edge, they're going to run into the sleigh outline and not be able to turn properly. Now we can start attaching the backrest. And I gave it a slight angle like this. While holding the backrest in place, I drilled holes going in an angle through the back of the backrest into the outline sleigh, and then I used my 2-inch screws to attach those together. Also did that along the bottom like here. And then I repeated that process with this piece here in front as well. And now we can attach the other sleigh outline side, and just attach that exactly like how you attached the other side, and now you can do any paint touch-ups that are needed. Like originally I didn't realize that this part would be showing, so I went back and covered that with red paint. And if you did decide to add your screws from the outside of the sleigh going in, here is where you can also cover those screws with red paint. I also decided to add a handle to make it easier to push. This is an old closet rod that I had laying around, but you could also just buy a wood closet rod from Home Depot. Cut that to size and just put it here and screwed it in from the outside in. So now you're completely done with your sleigh. And now that we're done building the sleigh, we can move on to building the reindeer. Building the reindeer was very similar to how we built the sleigh, so I'm not going to go into too much details, but I printed out the stencils that I created, which looks like this, and then just taped it down, and then using my jigsaw again, cut it out, and with this stencil, it will create 4 reindeer outlines because we stacked 2 pieces of plywood on top of each other and we were cutting them out at the same time. And here's how they look cut out. And we're going to put 2x4s between them so they're going to kind of look like this. So now we can start cutting the wood that's going to go between them. I got my 2x4 pieces cut, which I also put the cut list in my build plans as well. Sanded everything just like I did with the sleigh. Primed everything. And then after that dried, I painted the bodies this lighter brown. And then after that dried, went back in with a darker brown on the antlers and the hooves. So now we're going to assemble the reindeer. This is what all the 2x4s look like inside the reindeer. Although I did add a layer of 1/2-inch plywood to the feet because I needed to accommodate for the width of the wheels. I used wood glue and 1 3/4-inch screws to attach these to the reindeer. I first attached it from the inside, so through the 2x4s into the reindeer, and then sandwich those 2x4s in the center with another reindeer, drilled hole going from outside the reindeer through the reindeer into the 2x4s, and then added screws. And don't worry, we'll paint these screws later so they're less noticeable. And repeat that with the other reindeer. And now we're going to paint on a red collar. Technically, you can do this however you like. You can make it lower down, or you can put it here how I did it. I forgot to record it, but this is how I did the face. I added a nose and an eye on each side. And now we can start attaching the wheels to the reindeer. So we got 4-inch heels for these, and make sure that all of the wheels turn in all directions. And I used the 2-inch screws to attach these to the reindeer. Now that we're done building the reindeer, we're going to work on connecting the reindeer to each other and then connecting the reindeer to the sleigh as well. I got conduit piping and I slightly bent it to try and mimic the look of rope. So this is the pipe I got. I got 2 of these 10-foot conduit pipes and tried 2 different ways of slightly bending it. So I don't have a conduit pipe bender, and you could use that if you do have that, but I don't have that. So I just bent it by slightly stepping on it and then like slightly bending it and just moving down the length of the pipe as I go. And then the other way I also tried was setting the pipe on a step and then kind of bracing it and having my little sister step on it and kind of like weigh it down to try and create a bend. So it looks like this now. And it's not perfect, but you get the point. So now I can go cut all my metal pieces. So I used my jigsaw as well, and using a blade that's meant to cut metal, I cut the bent piece exactly in half at 5 feet. So we have 2 5-feet long pieces. And with the other 10-foot conduit piping that is still straight, I cut 2 pieces at 27.5 inches. So with all those metal pieces, I first primed them and then painted them red, and this red is the exact same color as the sleigh. And once those dry, we're going to drill holes on the ends of each pole. And while drilling these holes, make sure that 1, your drill bit is fatter than the screws that you're going to put through the pipe into your wood. And 2, make sure your holes are both facing the same way on each end. With one of the straight 27.5-inch long pieces, we're going to attach it to the back of the necks of the reindeer. So one will go right here, and using the 1 3/4-inch long screws, we're going to screw it through the pipe into the 2x4 that's behind the reindeer's neck. And with the other one, we're going to put it on top of the feet right here and put the screws down into the 2x4 feet. And we're going to repeat that with the feet on the other side and the neck on the other side as well. And with the longer bent pieces, we're going to attach it along the collar so it makes it look like the reins are connected to the collar. Repeat that with the other side, and at this point, these are getting pretty big, so I'd recommend taking it outside before connecting the sleigh to the reindeer. And the other side of the bent pipe, we're going to attach right here on the inside of the sleigh. And last thing is just to do paint touch-ups wherever it's needed. And now we're officially done building the Santa Sleigh and reindeer that rolls so you can take it wherever you want. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas.